This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
Dolly Parton said, "Find out who you are and do it on purpose." The power to know who you are and to authentically and unapologetically show up as that person is a gift. A gift that Kourtney Thomas is driven to help women discover and then design their own solid sense of self in body, life, and business. Hi, Kourtney.
Hi. What a wonderful intro.
Oh, thank you. Well, you made it so easy because, who doesn't know Dolly Parton?
Right.
And whether you love her or not, you can't help but be drawn in by, her infectious personality, her smile. She encompasses so much for women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. She's an icon.
Definitely. Did you see, obviously you saw the documentary on her on Netflix?
Yeah, I have watched and read very, very much material about Dolly Parton and listened to Dolly Parton's America is a great podcast as well.
She's a podcast?
It's like a documentary podcast actually about her. It's really good.
Oh, cool. I'll have to look that one up. So why Dolly? How did you get introduced to her and where does this story begin?
Yeah, well, when I was a little girl, for sure, Dolly has been a part of my life and part of my awareness for a long time. I can remember sitting on the floor of my great grandma's house, like watching Dolly on Hee Haw, So she was always kind of part of things from a very young age, and then really kind of came back into my awareness in a different way. It's been probably about, 6 or 7 years ago now, like kind of as an adult, as a business owner, as, a champion for other, women identified folks and empowerment and stuff like that. And really she certainly had a bit of a resurgence in popular culture, over the last several years. But for me, it kind of connected the dots of just like you said, here's a really powerful, engaging personality that you can't help but just smile along with her, sing her songs, just love watching her talk. And now here as an adult in my, late 30s, I really realized how much that always really resonated with me. And she was kind of a representation of, how I've always felt about myself, how I've always showed up, but at this really cool, again, kind of universal level, right? So I started to even kind of identify even more, certainly on a personal level and just kind of loving Dolly, but also on the professional side of things too. I kind of dug in, to really her history and what type of kind of her business empire, if you will, what kind of a business owner she is and the decisions that she's made throughout her career, which really as early as the 60s and 70s were totally unheard of for a woman in her industry. She has really changed the game in a lot of ways and set the example. And then kind of that cool combination, as we know, of she's just a very, humble person who's kind of well, I never really even thought about it. I did what I knew was right for me and, moved on down the road. And that was really something, like I said, that I was yes, I relate to that so much. So she really just kind of became a shining example of certainly how I hope to live my life and kind of the things that, I hope that other women can kind of bring out in their own world too.
And she really was a pioneer when it came to speaking out with, I don't think they realized what they were doing with the movie 9 to 5.
Yeah.
I didn't understand it. I only recently watched it and I never understood the concept behind it because I was raised by a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
And it was when I watched it, my husband said, this was an anthem for my mother because he was raised by a single working mother. And he said, they were talking about topics that nobody else was talking about. They really started to shine a light on it. And really, they could have been at that forefront of changing that revolution for working women.
Yeah.
So, she's touched women's lives without us really knowing about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite stories is really like kind of how, so Dolly got her start way earlier than most people know. I mean, she was just a little girl when she was taking the bus back and forth from, the like Sevier County and into Nashville and stuff. And the day after she graduated high school, she went to Nashville full time, like all this stuff. She started her career really early on the Porter Wagner show and was on that show for a long time. I think it was like almost a decade. And a lot of people don't know, like, obviously, I mean, her most famous song forever that's been recorded over and over and over again is I Will Always Love You.
Yes.
But she wrote that song to Porter when she left the show. Like, she basically kind of served for a long time as like his protege, kind of his, cutesy sidekick kind of a thing. And she got to a point when she was like, I'm ready to leave. Like, this is as far as I can go here. And I'm ready for the next step in my career. And it actually really changed their relationship. And like, not only did she get a lot of external pushback that was like, what are you thinking? Like, this is the best possible setup you could ever get. Like, you're at the top of your game. Like, you're a woman, all this stuff. And she was like, no, this isn't it. And I'm going to leave. He did not receive it well. It didn't go well.
No.
She ended up like writing that song to say like, listen, like, it's time for me to move on. Like, I'll always love you. And how you, certainly like launched my career essentially, but like, it's time for us to part ways. And that's huge. Like I said, that was unheard of. And that was in the 60s.
And she had the wisdom to know her own potential. And she was willing to go out, regardless of what it cost her. She was willing to blaze her own trail.
Yep.
And again, in the 60s, women just didn't do that. And her song, and it's funny, I didn't know she wrote that song, I Will Always Love You, because of course, I'm going to take it back to, it was Whitney Houston that sang it in The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
I thought it was a Whitney song. And it wasn't until they started talking about it in the documentary, I looked past, I'm like, what? Because you didn't know that was, no, I thought that was Whitney Houston. And then I think it was later in the documentary, she said, I think I paid for Dollyland with the proceeds from that song.
Right.
Because it has been recorded and played and remastered so many times.
Many times.
That, that's just, her business savvy and making sure that she did things properly at the beginning to protect her assets later on down the road. I mean, she really, she's an inspiration to so many of us, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I really think that is true. She, like I said, the more you kind of dig into it, a lot of times, she looks and even like kind of says this up front, she's like, hey, listen, like, I look a certain way and, you think I'm just big hair and big boobs, but like, I mean, there's a lot more to this, right? And I have always loved how that's her choice, right? And she's always talked about that. Like, this is how I wanted to look. That's how I've always wanted to look. Like, I get to decide, and that's my whole philosophy in coaching for both like life and for fitness and everything is like, listen, you get to choose. Like, it's not about, what's conventional or, what you think you should be doing or any of that. And she's always been very much like, this is who I am, but also like, don't count me out because like, I'm about my money, I'm about my family, I'm about my community. Like, and I'm, like you said in the intro, like, I'm going to be unapologetic about that. So don't underestimate me,
And that, I can't help but question how somebody like Dolly in the 60s had that self-awareness, yet women today in 2021, we still struggle with it. And in fact, a lot of us don't even know that we can be, or that it's okay to be ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a question and a conversation that I have often, and something that I have always been passionate about it. It's funny because I get it reflected back to me so often, like kind of a similar thing. It's like, man, you just like, you just like go for it. Like you are who you are and you kind of don't care what people think. And it's funny because, you know, I'm also always very open and, you know, totally transparent about my process and stuff. And just like you're saying, so many women out there, you know, we get up in our head and we're thinking like, what, like is this person sure about this? You know, at the same time, not realizing like, you know, there is something really powerful and valuable about just showing up as who you are, you know, even if inside your head you're having all these different thoughts or whatever. And you know, so I over time, my self-growth and self-awareness has really been to embrace that and embody it even further and, you know, kind of set that example, but invite other women who might be struggling in that space to you know, start to explore it for themselves as well. Because I think you're so right that like we just it gets so hard to say like it's okay if I am this way. There's nothing wrong with me. You know, I'm enough as who I am. It's all right if I'm a little weird, you know, like whatever the case may be. But you know, we feel a lot of pressure to not be able to show our full selves, right?
And it's something we talk about a lot on the show, and I'm still trying to figure out where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Who, you know, who inserted that into our brains that we can't be ourselves? And I know that we can be, and this goes for women and men, we can be our own worst enemy,
Yeah.
because anytime we let the what I call the itty bitty shitty committee start
Love it.
running what's going on, then we hold ourselves back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a complicated question with a complicated answer, you know. I mean, we we can kind of boil it down to, you know, external messaging and expectations and conditioning and stuff like that. But then to your point, like where does that come from? What is that rooted in, you know? And probably at a basic level, you know, patriarchy, capitalism. I mean, you know, like all of that definitely has a hand in it. You know, power and politics. But that like, you know, it just the webs of that, you know, like the tentacles that kind of come out and then the effects that it has on us personally in our real lives is like very, you know, very, very tough to pin down. And when it does come down, I think to those really bigger, you know, kind of societal elements, cultural elements, it feels so overpowering to even begin to overcome, you know. And two, some of the reality is that you know, some of these bigger pressures and systemic things that we are faced with, like in some cases, yeah, it might be totally fine and acceptable to show up exactly as you are, but the reality of our world is that in some cases that's entirely untrue, you know. I mean, in different corporate situations or maybe certain company cultures or maybe even certain communities or whatever, like people literally and physically cannot, you know, show up as their full selves. You know, it wouldn't be safe for them to do so. So again, it's like a really complicated question with a very complicated answer.
It is. And, you know, I've been on a journey of self-improvement, self-growth for the last 4 or 5 years. And I was beginning to wonder if it was maybe something that was particular to my generation. You said you're in your late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yep.
in my late 40s. So I thought
Okay.
it was something to do with that age group. But then I'm finding no, there's women 10 years younger. And then I had a podcast with somebody in their late 20s, and they referred to a quarter life crisis. And I was like, it sounds awful, but it never struck me. Because I mean, I always joke that I'm a bit of a slow learner when it comes to cluing into some of these things, because it's taken me into my late 40s, you know, to get my shit together. But, you know, so often we don't even, you know, we're told not to dim our light,
Mm-hmm.
but so often we don't know that we have a light there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's that. And sometimes also we're told not to dim our light, but like kind of on the side whispered like, well, but maybe like a little bit though.
Yeah,
Like,
nice
don't keep
girls
it
don't
that bright.
nice girls aren't boastful. Nice girls don't do this,
Uh-huh.
women, this is what a woman, this is mother, this is all
Yeah.
these little boxes you have to fit into.
Hmm.
And I tried being the person that I thought I was supposed to be. I
Mm.
tried to fit into those boxes and ended up absolutely miserable, not because of all the great things I had in my life,
Mhm.
but because I wasn't being my true self and it was
Mhm.
affecting every area of my life.
Mhm.
But once you learn who your true self is,
Mhm.
the outer world completely changes around you.
Yeah. I could not agree more. It's a really sticky process, or it can be, I mean, I think a lot of times, to that like light conversation, a lot of times like we learn to deny ourselves, right? Like, because we've kind of been told like, this is, like you said, this is who you should be, these are the boxes and the categories that you should fit into, and all this kind of stuff. And I really believe that just over the course of our lives, for many of us, like we just continue to like lose these pieces of ourselves, and tune them out, and just kind of funnel into status quo expectations, right? Regardless of how we're feeling inside. And when things do kind of butt up against that, we just say like, no, it's me that's the problem, right? Like it's not this external thing or this expectation that doesn't align with me. Like it's me that's the problem. So I need to change. And it can be really hard to walk through all that stuff. Like I call my process, my framework is uncover, unlearn, and unleash. And I find that so often that's what it takes. Like a lot of times, to your point, it's kind of this feeling of like, I don't feel good, but I don't actually know why. I don't really know what's going on with me. And so the first portion of that is really uncovering like what is going on? Like what are my stories? What have I, told myself? What is at play here? What is the different kind of conditioning, and then kind of walking into like unlearning some of the stuff that doesn't apply, understanding our values. Like that's a big driver, right? And a lot of times people can't identify that either. They can really identify what values they think they should have. And
Yeah.
so I really push people on that. And that's hard work, that's why it takes, just like you're saying, like working on personal development for years. I'm the exact same. It's ongoing forever. And it's really hard to kind of get down to that. Like, who really am I? Who do I want to be? What parts of myself, feel like me, but feel like maybe they've been lost, or that have been kind of covered up by other stuff, or other people's stuff, or whatever that might be. And that process of kind of coming home to that is, it's challenging, but like you said, it's just so deeply transformational whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah. And for me, it took me hitting, I call it scraping the bottom of shit barrel. That's where I was at the lowest of the low before I could start to see, learn, and grow. And it's one of my missions with the roller coaster podcast is to let anybody know that no, that's not the way it has to be. You
Right.
have all of these gifts and embrace them. It's our own uniqueness is what makes us all human. I mean, it would be pretty damn boring if we're all the same. Meanwhile, we're all trying to fit in these boxes and be the same, but it's
Yes.
like, wait a second, that's going to be a really crazy, boring world.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in business a lot, like I've kind of like you hear it as this idea of like peeing in the sea of sameness, right? Like where everybody is doing the exact same thing and
Yeah.
following the exact same formula. And for years and years, like I have just scraped and fought against that. And it's wild because everybody kind of says this rhetoric in the business and entrepreneurship and online world and all this kind of stuff that's like, it is like, oh, how are you different? And, all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, it's literally underneath the surface. It's everybody saying and doing the same thing, And what's really interesting about that is, again, kind of like the personal development side of things, like it makes it very difficult when you're the one who is just totally transparent, doing it different, really showing up in that unique way. And like people fight against it. They just cannot, like, we love what's comfortable, we love what's familiar. But at the same time, like on that personal side of things, then it is like, well, this is boring. Like the whole point of the human collective is that we're all unique. We are all completely, different and unique and wonderful beings. And at the same time, like there's a lot of just, I don't know, bigger cultural kind of stuff that's like, no, just like go into this one path and this one thing and just follow the rules, just stay in line. It's like a really, I think there's a lot of tension around it. Or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, or a person like me, to where there's a lot of tension with like, we know survival, as a human collective says, we need to be part of some type of a group, and we have that like evolutionary tug. But at the same time, like we are all different and we need to be different in order to also work, as a whole together as well. So it's yeah, I mean, that's all part of it, part of the challenge for sure.
And you have a very holistic approach when it comes to helping women, because you do focus on mind, body, and soul. You even
Yeah.
have fitness as a component of how you help women. And I think
Yep.
that's critical, because we are whole beings.
Mhm.
You can't just quote fix one part and oh, everything's great and good. No, everything depends on the other thing.
Yep, absolutely. I always, kind of like it's all integrated, right? Like there's so much overlap. I spent a lot of time in my early career in owning a business was strictly in personal training, right? So my background is very much in fitness specifically, but kind of how this all evolved to where it is today over time was basically exactly what you're talking about. I kind of was in my early career thinking like, this is really important, like, the workout and the, being very specific and all of this, like, this is the biggest thing. And, almost kind of had like, I mean, obviously not outwardly with clients, but almost kind of had this mindset of like, why can't you just do this and like check the box and figure it out and get it done? Like, then you'll be happy and healthy and all the other things. But it was like such a short period of time that I was working with women, going into their homes for personal training sessions, and really like seeing that this is life, right? Like I was not only getting to know them in that hour, but like their kids, their pets, their partners, their environment, their house, their schedule, their like just absolutely everything, right? And really realizing that all these things go together. One thing always affects the other. Your health, your fitness, your body, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Neither does your family, your relationships, your career, your work. All of this stuff comes together. We are whole people. And it's really important to, like you said, not just say, I'm going to fix this one thing and then things will be fine, but to really kind of see how everything's interconnected and, make sure we're not avoiding things or ignoring things or giving something too much credit that it deserves. Kind of all of this stuff is just mishmashed up together. It's messy. We have this instinct, I think, as humans, to have things be really, really simple. We love an easy button, but it just kind of doesn't work that way.
No, there's no easy button.
So
um, but we all have to start somewhere, and I'm
yes.
all about the baby steps.
Yes.
So if somebody is listening is thinking, something's not quite right with me, something's not quite right in my life, I don't know what it is,
Mhm.
what would you recommend is the first baby step, just to start to uncover, peel back, and get down to the core of the situation?
Oh, goodness. I feel like there are a lot of answers to that, or a lot of potential answers. My kind of whole thing is really like there is no one size fits all, right? Like we're always told there's like a right way to go, but really the only right way is the way that works for you. Um, but also I very much like I agree with you. Like I'm all about what's the smallest next best step, right? So I think when it comes to the mindset side of things, I'm really, really big on starting in acceptance. So I would certainly invite people to potentially explore the concept of self-compassion. If you're not familiar with it or haven't really like dug into what that specifically is, it can be a really helpful place to start, just to kind of recognize, again, understand, like, I really don't know what's going on. I'm having kind of a difficult time here. I don't know where to start. Let me just start in the present and an acceptance of that. That's a really good supporter. Maybe a next extension from that, an exercise that I really love. I mentioned values, but doing something really specific around that can sometimes be illuminating. A lot of times I do this with all clients. I do it with all workshops. I do it like in everything. And a lot of people who are sometimes sort of checked into this personal development space are like, no, I know my core values. And I'm like, okay. And I do a lot of work through guided journaling worksheets. So I hand them my 8-page worksheet on values or whatever, and they come back to me and they're like, oh, okay, I got it now.
I didn't think you meant that.
Right, exactly. Like, I really didn't have this figured out at all. And that can sometimes be really illuminating, because like, if you really get down to it and identify what truly matters to you, a lot of times what it does is allows you to kind of see like what things are bumping up against that, like where the tension is located, right? Like if something isn't aligned and you identify what it's not aligned with, sometimes that can give you kind of that next direction step, right? And typically, like if it's on the body side of things, that definitely still the self-compassion and the acceptance piece is always the starting point. But I always recommend, like, start with what you like and understand there is no minimum for movement, fitness, wellness, any of that. There is no minimum. That's scientifically proven, by the way. So you don't have to make things overwhelming. You don't have to jump into a 30-day or a 12-week or a blah or any of that stuff. Like, just think about one thing that you like to do and do that for the bare minimum amount of time that feels okay or fits in your schedule or whatever, and start there, build from there.
And that's the important thing, is that it's to start somewhere, anywhere.
Yep.
But just start
Yeah.
something. Take that first, even if it's like half a baby step.
Yep.
Start something. You
Yeah.
have a lot of resources and ways that you can help people. What is the best way for somebody to connect with you?
The best way is honestly very direct with me. My website, KourtneyThomas.com, and it's Kourtney with a K, like Kourtney Kardashian. I, by the way, like, side note story, I used to absolutely hate that because it was not a thing when I was a girl in the 80s. And then Kourtney Kardashian became famous, and all of a sudden Kourtney with a K is totally fine. So direct to my website is a great place. I do a lot of work and share a lot of insights and resources and reflections through my email list, which you can sign up for directly on my website, and also get like people tell me it's too much of a give. Actually, it's a very robust worksheet, workbook. Actually, it's not a worksheet, it's a full-on workbook that kind of actually addresses some of these initial points. So, you can get that if you sign up for the email list. That's kind of my biggest thing. I'm not really on social media anymore. I'm on LinkedIn. So that's a thing. If there are any like kind of career focused people there, I definitely connect there. But if you go to my website, you can also get me directly on like a free discovery call, or straight to my email. And I like don't even have an assistant or any of that stuff. So, I actually love writing emails, and you'll get directly to me. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, if you're looking at connecting with Kourtney, make sure you check out the show notes. All of the links will be in there. And Kourtney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.
Love